This 7-year-old boy was forced to flee his war-torn country. 30 years later, he'd be one of the greatest midfielders of all time. From refugee to national hero, this is the heartbreaking yet inspirational story of Luka Modric. Modric, now 38, has become one of his country's most famous and loved people, representing his country 177 times. But if we rewind the clock 30 years, we get a much more horrific story that a young Croatian boy had to survive through. He was born on the 9th of September 1985 and was raised in the hamlet of Modrici, north of the city of Zadar in SR Croatia, which at the time was a republic of the SFR Yugoslavia, a country that no longer exists. He spent many of his early years living in a stone house with his grandparents, where he'd shepherd goats at 5 years old. At this point, he hadn't yet touched a football. Little did he know that the terrifying events that would follow would leave him with a ball at his feet for the rest of his life. At 6, the Croatian War for Independence escalated and forced Modric and his family to flee their home. Most of his family managed to escape, but the same couldn't be said for his grandfather Luka, who Luka Jr. would never see again. His grandfather was executed by Serbian rebels, who then went on to burn their family home to the ground, living the next 7 years of his life in the Hotel Kolovir in the ancient city of Zadar. His father joined the Croatian army as an airplane mechanic, and it was during these years that Luka would finally find the love of his life. In those years, thousands of bombs fell on his country, leaving his newfound love as the only escape from his terrifying reality. He recalls the period as a tough time for him and his family, but his parents tried to leave him as unaware as possible of the war, pushing him to make friends with the other children whose parents didn't let their circumstances affect their childhood. This time in Luka's life would shape him as a person. He'd mostly play football in the parking lot of the hotel, but at this time he was also entered into a school and a sporting academy, the latter of which took the little money that his parents had, but they wanted to do everything they could to keep him out of harm's way. Supported by his family, he'd attend football camps in Zadar, under the tutelage of Tomislav Basic, who Modric would consider his sporting father. He had to wear wooden shin pads. The last of his family's money had been spent on giving Luka a chance, and that was a big bet to place. Due to being considered too young and too light, he wouldn't be signed by the biggest professional club in his region, but this wasn't the first time the young man had faced adversity. After impressing in a youth tournament in Italy, Tomislav Basic arranged for Luka to join Dinamo Zagreb at 16 years old in 2001. It was here and in a loan spell in the Bosnian Premier League where he'd begin to develop the incredible technical talent that now sets him apart from almost every other player in his position. By 18, he'd be the Bosnian Premier League Player of the Year, later claiming that someone who can play in the Bosnian Premier League can play anywhere. His final loan spell would take him to a Croatian side into Zaprisic, spending 1 season there and helping them qualify for the preliminary round of the UEFA Cup. At this point, he'd be a diamond in the rough. After winning the Croatia Football Hope of the Year award, he finally returned to Dinamo Zagreb in 2005. After shining brightly everywhere he went, Dinamo snatched him up, signing him on a 10-year contract. With his earnings, he could finally buy a flat in Zadar for his family, and at least begin to give them the life that they deserved after investing almost every single penny they had in Luka for the past 10 years. Safe to say he'd come a long way since his wooden shin pads. He'd secure a place in Dynamo's first team, contributing 7 goals in 31 matches in his first full season, helping them win the league, and they'd go on to do the same the following year, which made Dynamo give Luka the captain's armband, bearing in mind he is still only 22. In a partnership with Eduardo, who you may remember is playing for Arsenal and having a terrible leg break injury, the two managed to help their side qualify for the UEFA Cup for the first time in their history. It came down to one final game against Ajax. They went 1-0 down until they were awarded a penalty, which of course starman Luka had to take. He slotted it away and the game ended 1-1 in regular time. They won the match 3-2 in extra time. The little boy had now made it to Europe. The little boy who never lost hope, kicking a ball around a hotel parking lot as a refugee. In his last home match with the club at their home stadium, Modric was given a standing ovation, with fans around the venue holding up banners to show their love for the youngster. Final season with the club helped them win the championship by 28 points. He was obviously highly scouted and was courted by the likes of Barcelona, Arsenal and Chelsea, but he wanted to wait to assess his options before making a final decision. Surprisingly, it wouldn't be any of the clubs that we just named that would scoop up the future Hall of Famer rumour, Manchester City and Newcastle United were also sniffing around to sign him, which prompted Tottenham chairman Daniel Levy to fly to Zagreb as soon as possible to convince Luka to come to North London. And he succeeded. He was the first signing of the Premier League summer transfer window and equalled the club's transfer record of £16.5 million. He was awarded the number 14 jersey, reportedly in honour of legend Johan Cruyff. He had a very slow start to his life in England, suffering from a knee injury and being labelled as a lightweight by sections of the media and even Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger. He still hadn't filled out his frame, but as you know, adversity forced Luka to become even better. Luka stated, "Critics push you forward to show people that they are wrong. Maybe I look lightweight, but I am a really strong person mentally and physically." But this sadly would align with a string of bad form, which would lead to concerns both for himself and the Croatian national team. He spent his earlier days at Tottenham playing as a number 10 until the appointment of Harry Redknapp shifted him into a position that he was more familiar with, on the left side of midfield, or a place where he really found his footing, the centre of the pitch. The new manager saw Luka's potential and planned to build the entire side around him. Now that he was in a position where he was comfortable and was able to influence play, he started to flourish, scoring his first competitive goal against Spartak Moscow.
It's the crossing Modric! Luka Modric celebrates his first goal for Tottenham.
He began to settle in, and goals in multiple Premier League games gave him the confidence that he had back at Dynamo to take over games and carry his team to victory. Before the start of the 2009 season, Redknapp described Luka perfectly. He's a hell of a player and a manager's dream. He trains like a demon and never complains. Given what we know about his upbringing, it's no surprise that he has no complaints about getting to live the life of his dreams, provide for his family, and play his favourite sport for hundreds of thousands of pounds. After a great start the following season, he'd be hit with another challenge. In a 2-1 win over Birmingham, he was taken off with a suspected calf injury. The next day it'd be confirmed that he had a fracture in his right leg, which would force him to be out for 6 weeks. But he refused to let that halt his momentum. He came back swiftly and announced his return with 2 goals in 2 games against Burnley and Everton.
Much space probably from Burnley's perspective. Oh, what a goal!
This forced Tottenham's hand, prompting them to secure Luka on a further 6-year contract. But of course, there would always be speculation about his future. He was one of the most exciting talents in the world of football. And to that, Luka said, "Tottenham gave me my chance in the Premier League, and I want to go on to achieve great success here with them. Yes, there have been inquiries from other big clubs, but I have no interest in going anywhere." He had helped Spurs to a top 4 finish, and he'd stay with them for 2 out of the 6 years of his contract. In a draw with Manchester United, the Croatian played incredibly well, leaving his manager once again singing his praises. He was unbelievable. The little man takes the ball in the tightest areas with people around him, wriggling out of situations. He could play in any team in the world, and perhaps that last statement would come back to bite him. He'd helped push Tottenham in their first involvement in the Champions League. Efforts against Werder Bremen and AC Milan helped propel them to the quarter-finals, where they'd eventually be knocked out by a club that would become very special to Luka, Real Madrid. He shone in his 32 Premier League games in the 2010-2011 season, having the highest number of passes per match for Spurs out of their entire squad. He was voted Tottenham Hotspur Player of the Year, and even Sir Alex Ferguson, who would have admittedly loved to sign Luka, said he could easily have been Player of the Season. In the January transfer window, Luka had his first period of being heavily pursued by other clubs, with Chelsea leading the charge, making bids of £22 and £27 million to try and bring the midfielder to their club, now that he'd found his footing in England. Both bids were rejected by club chairman Daniel Levy, but Modric would come out and say that he would welcome a move across London, and that he had a gentleman's agreement with the chairman that he would entertain offers from big clubs. The start of the 11-12 season started with a 3-0 loss to Manchester United, which would leave Luka saying his head wasn't in the right place. He continued to try and force a move to Chelsea. The Blues made a final bid on the last day of the transfer window for £40 million, but it was once again rejected. But whilst he was still wearing white, Redknapp told him to focus on his playing, but the summer transfer market would be where he would finally get his wish. His statement read, "I enjoyed every moment with Tottenham, but in one moment you feel you need to take a step forward. I think it was the right time for me to go." £30 million and a 5-year contract later, and Luka would make the move to the club where he would cement himself in football history, none other than Real Madrid. 2 days after signing, he'd already be on the pitch, making his debut against Barcelona, replacing Mesut Ozil in the 83rd minute. Not a bad way to start, being thrown straight into an El Clasico. They'd go on to win the match, winning his first piece of silverware with the club in his first appearance, lifting the Supercopa de España. That was already more silverware than he won in his 4 years at Tottenham, maybe a sign of things to come. But despite this great start, once again, he'd struggled to find his footing. This time due to a lack of pre-season training, after a summer of speculation and transfer dealings rather than keeping up his fitness. The presence of veteran Xabi Alonso and Mesut Ozil obviously made it tricky to make his mark in the side, especially with a lack of fitness. Making most of his appearances off the bench and out of position, Luka didn't shy away from working harder to get what he wanted. He scored his first goal in a 4-0 victory over Real Zaragoza and had his first statement game in a win over Ajax in the Champions League, assisting 2 goals. Despite the glimpses of what he was capable of, a Spanish newspaper voted him as the worst signing of the season. All he needed was a shot, a run of games, or a single performance that would allow him to make the statement, "I have arrived," and he'd get that chance. After pivotal assists in important games, the turning point would be in a match against Manchester United. With United a goal up, his long-range goal would equalise, and he'd play a pivotal role in helping them advance to the next stage after winning 3-2. He'd start once again in a game against Mallorca, and he was able to replicate this performance, scoring another long-range volley and helping Madrid win 5-2. The tables were turning quickly. All he had to do was keep the momentum going. By the season's end, he'd be the player with the most completed passes in the side, and he'd carry that form over into the 2013 season. Under the appointment of Carlo Ancelotti, Modric became one of the most frequent starters in the team. He'd be named the best midfielder in Spain. Cristiano Ronaldo said, "He's the head of the midfield. Every day in Madrid, pressure is coming at you from all sides." Luka not only withstands that pressure, but has grown among it to become one of Madrid's best players. High praise from footballing royalty. He'd average a 90% passing completion over the following season, helping his team win the Copa del Rey and reach the final of the Champions League, with 5 performances against Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich. He'd finished the season with a Champions League trophy firmly in his grasp, and after assisting a goal on the day where Madrid won 4-1 in extra time, Madrid's 10th win of the Champions League against the tired and well-beaten Atletico Madrid. He had now arrived, and this was only further set in stone after being included in the UEFA Champions League Team of the Season and receiving the award once again for the best midfielder in Spain. With the departure of Xabi Alonso, he was paired with another future Madrid legend, Toni Kroos. They started the following season as they meant to go on, winning the UEFA Super Cup and winning their opening league game 2-0, and then scored his first goal of the season in a 2-0 win over Villarreal, with his 7th Madrid goal from outside the box. Unfortunately, the rest of the season was plagued with injury, somewhat halting the momentum Luka had built up in his newfound home, with Ancelotti blaming Madrid's failure to win matches in the league and the Champions League on him being out injured. Ancelotti was let go, and Rafael Benitez came in for a short period, but Zinedine Zidane would be the long-term manager who helped Modric reach even higher heights, if that even seemed possible. He branded Luka as a master of the game, and the crucial connector between defence and attack. He was a regular starter for the next 2 seasons, winning the Champions League in both of them, in what would become a record-setting 3 Champions Leagues in a row. Year after year, he was included in the Champions League Team of the Season, and called the best midfielder in Spain. He became the first Croatian to win 3 Champions Leagues. He'd come 4th in the award for UEFA's Men Player of the Year, and 5th in the 2017 Ballon d'Or. But much like when he left Tottenham, he knew he was capable of more. After all, he didn't flee his country, make his family sacrifice their livelihoods, live in a hotel for 7 years, and have his grandfather executed to settle for anything short of absolute greatness. He went into the following season as one of the best midfielders in the world, and he'd finished the season as the best player in the world. That year, he'd captained his national side for both their qualifying and World Cup campaigns. This is where he established himself as the national hero who he described him as. He scored a crucial penalty in a 4-1 victory over Greece, which would seal his country's involvement in the World Cup. They were placed in Group D alongside Argentina, Iceland and Nigeria. During the tournament, Modric, Rakitic and Mandzukic were named as the golden generation of Croatian football. He'd be named the man of the match in their first game against Nigeria, scoring a penalty. His long-range shot against Argentina would land him his second man of the match in 2 World Cup appearances, and he was also named the best player of the group stage. In a nail-biting round of 16, it really wasn't looking good. Luka had missed a penalty, and his team was hanging on for dear life against a motivated Denmark. Luckily on this occasion, his team won on penalties. That was way too close. He wasn't going to let that happen again, till he did. Once again, 2-2 in extra time against Russia, and there's no way he was missing his penalty this time. They won once again on penalties. They'd made it so far, and Luka loved representing his country. He'd give it his all in what was yet again a nail-biting match against England, a team full of talent and touted by the media as one of the tournament's favourites. Croatia were a dark horse, and they were grinding out victories left and right. 2-1 in extra time, breaking English hearts, and being the first Croatian side ever to make it to the World Cup final. Modric ran the most miles out of any player on the pitch, had the most successful dribbles and the most passes. He was giving it his all. They just had one more step. France. Mbappe, Pogba, Dembele, Kante and Griezmann. Despite Luka's best efforts and even being awarded the Golden Ball for the best player of the entire tournament, they were welcomed back to Croatia in Zagreb, where he had once called home, by tens of thousands of adoring fans. He had made his mark in football history already, but now he was a national hero as well. He represented the story of a country that had been through so much and come out of the other side, producing world-class talents and a generation of determined and gritty professionals. He'd received the FIFA Men Player of the Year award, with Luka stating, "Shows that we can all become the best with hard work, dedication and belief. All dreams can come true." And finally, he'd have his hands on his first Ballon d'Or. He hadn't settled for less. He took it to a new level once again. He dedicated the award to players who should have won in previous years and didn't. Xavi, Iniesta, Wesley Sneijder and more. 1 Ballon d'Or, 6 Player of the Year awards, 6 Champions Leagues, 4 La Liga titles, 4 UEFA Super Cups and 867 appearances. And that's not even halfway of his career accomplishments. That little refugee boy was a footballing legend, a national hero, and a player that will be in the record books for the rest of time. That was the story of Luka